Hi, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I guess you all can hear me clearly, right? Ravisha, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, afternoon again, and thank you for spending your afternoon on this. Really appreciate it. And the very reason why we thought of conducting these information sessions early this year is because last year we had kind of difficulties with fulfilling the requirements. Some of our students, for an example, had issues with booking their IELTS test dates and getting the certain documents of them legalized through entities like Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry's Consular Division. So we kind of thought of giving you in advance information about how to prepare yourself to apply for scholarships in Nordic countries in advance, so you'll have some time to organize these basic requirements. Having said that, this information session will kind of focus on postgraduate scholarship applications. And those who want to apply for bachelor's could also gain some knowledge from this, I believe. But at the same time, I need to remind you that this session will be limited to applying for postgraduate education. And also the entire session will be recorded and shared on our social media channels for your information. And let's get started. So anyway, first things first, I'll give you a little bit of information about our firm. Eduzone is now celebrating our 12th year this year. We've been in the industry for like 12 years now continuously. And I believe we were among the first couple of firms in Sri Lanka to promote higher education in Sweden. Back in 2010. And also I can confidently state that we were the first firm in Sri Lanka to promote higher educational opportunities in the Scandinavian country, Finland. And we recently had a count of students we have processed, and we have so far handled about 400 plus main applicants. When you add these, your spouses and children, the number is in thousands, but when it comes to the number of main applicants, it's around 400. And for Nordic countries, I believe it's a pretty good number because anyhow, there's a limit of international students they could accommodate for English medium master's programs. So we're quite happy with the numbers we have done. And we also have a scholarship record of about 750 million Sri Lankan rupees. And this year, I'm hoping this will be increased to at least 1 billion worth of Sri Lankan rupees by the end of this autumn, hopefully. And we also have a cap of 50 qualified applicants we process every year. This year, the year 2021, we had kind of difficulty stopping at 50 because we were receiving so many inquiries from mutual friends and friends of those who have used our services in the past, and also relatives of these former clients of ours. So we had kind of difficulties saying no to them. So that number kind of increased to about 80. But for the year 2023, we have decided to, strictly limit the number to 50 because we're not a very like a multi-million-dollar firm or anything of that sort. Our primary focus is to kind of promote sustainable education in Nordic countries. And there's always a limit to the number of students we can process, regardless of the number of inquiries we receive. So that's about us. Anyways, you can find most of this information online. And we also have a combination of positive and negative comments online. So feel free to go find it. So let's start from the first slide. It's about the entry requirements to apply for a scholarship. So the basic most requirement if you're planning to apply for a master's scholarship is to have a bachelor's degree with a class. If you have like a second upper or first class, you will have higher chances of getting selected for a tuition fee waiver at least. But even if you have a second lower, or at least a GPA closer to having a second lower, for example, if you have a GPA of about 2.9 at least, you can still try your luck with securing a fee waiver. And my personal opinion is that if you select Nordic countries for your higher education, it's always better to have a tuition fee waiver, at least a partial one. So that kind of creates this safe environment for you to be able to successfully complete the master's and then to apply for a job offer and to secure a work permit later on, because these countries, namely countries like Norway, Sweden, and Finland, they have kind of higher living expenses. And if any of you has the intention of working in these countries to fund your tuition fee, is kind of a high risk move. So if you have that kind of an intention, I still recommend you to be able to at least cover half of your entire tuition fee. So that kind of creates, again, a safe environment for you to be able to, complete the master's successfully. So having said that, you have plenty of scholarship options in these countries. And if you have a class and the right IELTS score, I think these are very kind of safe options for you to try. So we mainly promote 4 countries, namely Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. And if you're an unmarried applicant who want to apply for your higher studies there, we can basically add about 3 options from each country and apply for up to about 12 master's options in all these 4 countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. But in case if you're a married applicant who want to go with your spouse and if you have children with them, then we can suggest the countries Sweden and Finland, where they have a fairly smooth visa application process for a family. So the second requirement is to have an IELTS score of at least 6.5 with 6 for each component at the academic module. And for Sweden, there's actually an exemption process. If you have completed your bachelor's degree in English medium, and if the medium is very clearly mentioned on your transcript, you can apply for an exemption from providing an English proficiency test score like IELTS. But in case, if you don't have the medium mentioned on your transcript, you can still use your results from secondary education. For an example, if you have at least a credit pass for your general English subject at A-levels, and also a credit pass for your English subject at OD level, you can request them to waive off your English proficiency test score requirement based on your secondary education, and they usually do that. But this is only applicable for Sweden. And my opinion of that is that if you have a second upper or first class, there's no point of applying for Sweden alone and expect a scholarship. Best option is to obviously try multiple options, because all these are good countries anyway. And that will kind of increase your chances of finding a scholarship. But for an example, if you do not have a class for your bachelor's, and if you have some kind of budget to fund your education, I think Sweden is an option you can try without an English proficiency score. So the third point is about the ability to pay a fee and study in case if you are not admitted without a scholarship. If you're not admitted with a scholarship. So I talked about this earlier. If you have any intention to pay a tuition fee and study in these countries, especially countries like Sweden, make sure you have at least 2 semesters worth of tuition fees and at least first 6 months worth of living expenses. And the requirement of having sufficient living expenses is applicable even if you're on 100% tuition fee waiver. Because these countries, if you compare these 4 options, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia, with the other mainstream options you may have, one big difference is I think the long run is fairly easy for you to settle in these countries. Most of these countries, again, request you to have a full-time job offer. That means the country's minimum salary requirement, but that's it. There's no requirement for you to find the job offer related to your area of studies or related to your previous work experience as such. All they ask for is a job offer. And in some instances, for an example, I have seen some of my former clients have been able to secure their work permits based on job offers received as a full-time cleaner or maybe a full-time delivery driver or similar positions. I don't think it will be possible in most of these other countries. But the biggest worry you should be having is to be able to survive there initially until you or your spouse start working there. So it's better to prepare for at least first 6 months to go by your own. I'm talking about a budget of about at least 1.1 or 1.2 million for an individual applicant, or at least 1.5 million for a family of 3 or 4. So that's the kind of budget you should allocate for the first 6 months. And apart from that, if you have to pay a tuition fee, at least a partial tuition fee, then you must be able to pay for at least the first year in order to kind of create a safe environment for you to successfully complete your education. And also, there's a requirement of GMAT nowadays for most of these high-ranked universities there. For example, if you apply for Uppsala University or Stockholm University or KTH or even Gothenburg University in Sweden, they expect you to have a GMAT score, and they usually process these GMAT holders first before they focus on non-GMAT holders. So it's always a very wise idea if you have a bachelor's degree related to a business stream. For example, if you have a degree in business administration or accounting, finance, economics, or any of these areas, it's better to take up the test GMAT. I know it's quite an expensive investment. I think you have to pay about $250 for the test alone. But if you can secure a higher score of at least like 500 and above, the chances of you being able to secure a scholarship also, increase with that. And even in Finland, certain universities like Aalto University, University of Oulu, these are 2 such universities where they prefer you to have a GMAT score. Anyway, end of the day, GMAT is not a compulsory requirement, but if you can invest some money on that and time, I think it will be very well worth it then, by the time you apply. And also, this is applicable only for those who want to apply for management related areas, management or something related to business. For everyone else, it's not a requirement. And there's also another requirement, that just happened last year. Some universities, if you want to apply for a university in Estonia, which is a very, very safe and good option for those who are currently having a qualification in the software domain or ICT or information technology domain. Most Estonian universities now have started asking for a GRE score. So if you know about Estonia and if you want to apply for IT related masters there, or any like technical subject there, especially for Tallinn University of Technology, which is also one of the very high, university with high rankings. They expect you to have a GRE score. They just started last year. They didn't ask for GRE before that, but now it's a requirement. But for any other university, be it Norway, Sweden, or Finland, you don't need a GRE score for any of these universities, at least as of today. So the last one is about the ability to pay remaining tuition fee if admitted for a partial scholarship. It's also very clear if you're admitted for a 50% tuition fee waiver, and you still have to be able to pay that remaining tuition fees at least for the first year. And if you start working there, I think being able to pay the second year is quite possible, but still you have to have sufficient funds on the minimum side for the first year. So anyway, I'll talk about the tuition fee range so you can have an idea about the amount of money you should be spending in these countries. In countries like Sweden and Finland, the average tuition fee for most non-technical subjects is around 1.2 to 1.3 million per semester. So you're looking at an annual cost of about 2.4 to 2.8 million on average. That's the kind of annual fee you are looking at. But when it comes to technical or science-related subjects, then the amount of tuition fee you have to spend is about 1.6 to 1.8 million. So on average, you pay about 3.2 to 6 million per annum. So if you are to apply as a fee-paying applicant, it's a must to be able to pay your tuition fees at least for the first year. So The second slide is about the disadvantages of Nordic countries. As you may know, it's not for everyone. But again, these are safer options if you're kind of, comfortable with the living environments of those countries. So the biggest disadvantage I see is the language barrier you have there, because although most of these, Finns or Swedes or even Norwegians, although they speak English to a certain extent, if you are to find a job, it'll be kind of hard initially for you to find one without having some language skills. So that's one of the biggest disadvantages I see in these countries. But having said that, it depends on individual skills. If you go out and talk to people in a manner, in a kind of with a bit of a personal touch, I think you can still try to find a job without any language skills. But end of the day, it's a kind of a requirement you have to work on. In the long run, if you are planning to live in these countries, it's an absolute must to be able to learn the language. But the advantage you have is there's a support system in place. So if you can put in some efforts, all these countries offer free language lessons to incoming immigrants. For an example, in Sweden, they have these Swedish for immigrant centers scattered throughout the country where the language is being taught free of charge. And in other countries too, there are similar systems. And also the second one I see is about the harsh climate during some months of the year. And that's also something you have to expect. There's no other option. And the third one is the culture shock you may have, because it will not happen to each and everyone, but in the past I received some negative feedback from our clients about kind of feeling uncomfortable because they are probably the only one in their town that looks like them. So that's something you have to get used to. No other option. So that's also I see as one disadvantage you may have in these countries. And the last one is the one I explained, the very first difficulties of finding employment. Although you can access any of the public officers to get anything done in English, when it comes to finding a job, they may not feel happy to hire you if you don't speak a word of their language. It's always better to work on the language, and after you receive an admission decision and after you know where you will be applying for a visa, it's better to start working on the language, at least to a certain extent. If you can at least learn the basics, it will certainly help you. And the next slide is obviously about the advantages. And as you can see, there are more advantages in these countries than the number of disadvantages I explained previously. The biggest one I see is the amount of scholarships available. And there's a reason why they offer scholarships in large numbers to international students. The biggest reason is if you take Norway, for an example, they don't charge any tuition fees from international students from their public universities, even as of now. It's absolutely free of charge. You still have to cover up your living expenses, but there's no tuition fees involved. And it's the very same for all these countries, like even in Sweden, they used to have an absolute free education system in the year 2011. So still they offer scholarships in large numbers. And same for Finland. Finland actually started charging a tuition fee before 3 years. Back in 2019, only they introduced tuition fees. And it's been only about 3 years after the fees are introduced. So still, if you apply, there's a considerably high chance for you to secure at least a partial scholarship for the tuition fee. And Estonia is not a Nordic country, but still is one of the very good options for IT graduates. And even in Estonia, there were no tuition fees until the year around the same time, until around 2019 or something. And I personally think it's probably the best option if you're an unmarried applicant with a background in the software industry, because it's very easy for you to secure a full-time job offer related to your own industry after completion of the master's. An example, the very first applicant of mine, Estonia, I think we processed his application around the year 2015 or something. And he's now very well settled there. in the IT industry. And I personally have a lot of friends who are working there, and it's kind of an IT hotspot. But I don't think it's the same for any other occupation. So think about it. The second one is the social security benefits regardless of your visa. As you may know, all Nordic countries, they don't ask for your police certificate. They don't ask for your health records or anything at all for them to grant you a visa. So these countries at the same time, regardless of what visa you have, you still have access to their healthcare systems. You still can send your children to their schools without a tuition fee or school fee. You can still send your children to their daycare systems, paying the same amount of money as a citizen. An example, in Finland and Sweden, the amount of you pay for a daycare is just around 50 euros a month. And that's roughly around 12,500 to 13,500 rupees. And I don't think you can even find a daycare in Sri Lanka for that amount. So that's the kind of benefits you have. Whatever visa you're on, you still have these basic social security system available to you. And that's one of the biggest advantages you have in Nordic countries. And the third one is the ability to apply for a work permit, even with an entry-level kind of a job offer. This is also something I explained previously. The requirement you have to live in the country after completion of your master's is to find a job offer that meets the minimum salary requirement. If you fulfill that requirement, regardless of the job you have, you can still apply for a work permit and continue to stay in the country. So the only only issue I see with these countries is there's a high number of Sri Lankans nowadays select these countries without any preparation. If for an example, if someone goes to Sweden or Finland by paying the first semester's worth of tuition fee with the hope of covering the remaining fees after arrival, they're in trouble. But as long as you have the right budget and the minimum amount of tuition fees to pay, I think these are perfectly safe options. And the fourth one is accessible healthcare facilities. I already explained this. There you have the right to access, for example, the Swedish healthcare system as free. Even in other countries, you have access to certain benefits. But countries like Norway and Finland, they ask the main applicant to produce an insurance policy at the time of visa application. But you still have some access to their systems as well. And once you land a work permit, you have the full access. But in Sweden, you have it from the day one. They don't require anything from your end other than the requirement of studying in their country for a minimum of 2-year duration. So if you study something like a master's for 2 years or a bachelor's degree, you get a personal number, something we call a personal number, which is like a tax number. And as long as you have a personal number, you have access to these security benefits they have. So the other one is free education for your children, including state-funded daycare facilities. I already explained this. And the ability to study all vocational training in local language, free of charge. This is something I learned very recently from one of my previous clients. And in Sweden, if you go there with your spouse, and while your spouse continues his studies, if you can learn the Swedish language up to a certain extent, they call it level D something. It's like you have to learn the language for a minimum of about 1 year. And once you reach that level, you have the ability to study the vocational training, whatever the vocational training programs they have, without paying any tuition fees. And the biggest advantage you have is, what I heard is that these vocational training centers are connected with the employment officers from the public sector. Whoever completes these qualifications are usually guided to find a full-time offer by the Swedish government itself. So it's one of the advantages I've recently learned about. And if you work according to a plan, there's also a possibility for you to find a job by studying something vocational, something that belongs to the vocational training sector there. And the last one is obviously the inclusive system in place to absorb immigrants. And all these countries offer language lessons, a certain amount of social security benefits regardless of your visa, and also the ability to find a job offer and to apply for a work permit regardless of what job it is. So these benefits are there, and I see these are some of the biggest advantages you have in Nordic countries. So the other side is about things to be concerned of. The very first one is you must either be on a scholarship or have the ability to pay for at least the first 2 semesters. I already explained this. It's always better to have a scholarship so you can feel very, very safe knowing that you just have to cover up your day-to-day expenses. But if you don't have a scholarship, you must have the ability to bring at least 1 year worth of tuition fees and 6 months worth of living expenses with you to ensure that you can complete the purpose you are there for and to apply for a work permit. And the second one is to have sufficient funds to cover up your living expenses at least for the first 6 months, at least 1.2 million for a family, or 2 or 1 million for a family of 2, or 1 million for an individual. This is already covered. So anyway, when I created this presentation, the amount is around 1.2 million for a family of 2, or 1 million for an individual. But the Sri Lankan rupee being kind of depreciated now, I think you better prepare for more funds, at least like 1.3 or 1.4 million for a family, or at least 1.1 or 1.2 million for an individual. And when you apply next year, 2023, these figures might change again. And the third one is the ability to try securing a full-time job offer for the spouse. It's also very, very important. The sooner you find a job, the better environment you will have in terms of your finances. Best way to do that is when you arrive in the country, you will have to first obviously apply for your personal number or the equivalent version from other countries. And once you get your tax number, you can approach these places one by one physically, hand over your CVs, talk to them with a bit of a personal touch. And once one of you start working there, I think you can feel really safe, especially if you're on 100% fee waiver, which although I'm not happy to discuss about the amount of money you can earn and all that, I think if at least one of you start working there, like a long shift, whatever you make, regardless of whatever job you do, is good enough in most cases to cover up the expenses of the entire family. So if you don't pay any tuition fees, you can start feeling very safe knowing that whatever you earn is enough to cover up your day-to-day expenses. And the other point is about the willingness to learn the local language and to make local contacts. I personally believe that it's always better to move with the locals as much as possible, because that kind of give you more chances to learn their language. And also that creates a very good references, because it's also very like a critical requirement for any immigrant, any region immigrant, when finding a job, because they don't, even if they don't believe in you, they will believe in people you know personally in their country. So to do that, you obviously have to move with them, in fact, with them as much as possible. So learning the local language, at least putting some efforts to learn the local language, is an absolute must. And the last point here is to complete your studies entirely or find a legal pathway before discontinuing. It's also something you have to think of, because in countries like Sweden and even Finland, although they have created the opportunity for you to apply for a work permit without completing the entire studies you are there for, I think it's nowadays like a very high risk move, especially with Sweden, because so many immigrants who go there on student visas kind of discontinue their studies midway and apply for their work permits, which is not always going to be successful, because it has happened with Sweden now. It's no longer the case like earlier, before 5, 6, 7 years back. It was perfectly normal for anyone to go there, complete the first semester, and to find a job offer, which can help you to secure a work permit. And once you land the work permit, you can forget about your studies. But it's not the case anymore for Sweden. They're very strict about it now. my advice is it's always better to complete the studies you're there for and then use that post-study time period to apply for a work permit. But still, in countries like Finland, you can still convert your study permit to a work permit if you have a full-time offer. But I don't really recommend doing that because anyways, even if you forget about the legal requirements, I think having a local qualification will always help you if you have any intention to find a professional career later on. So it's always better to, complete the entire qualification. But in case if you want to stop, please ensure you have a work permit, or otherwise, it'll kind of create a difficult environment for fellow Sri Lankans who want to follow you later on. So I'll explain a little about the application process through us. Anyway, this session is for everyone. Even if you're planning on applying directly, I think you can get at least a bit of a knowledge about where you should focus on. But if you apply through us, it's a 3-step process. There's an assessment process, an actual application process, and the visa process. The assessment process is all about identifying what to apply. So we can, after obtaining certain documents from your end, we can spend some time, find out what you can apply, the course contents, and the formal requirements you have to fulfill in order to submit an actual application. And the actual application process is about applying for all these programs. We'll need certain documents from your end. We'll need some ideas from your end, especially with like motivational letters. We need your version first before adding some value to it if required, and then we can finalize the application process. The visa process depends from one country to another, but once you land your admission, or if you may in some cases land multiple admissions, in which case you can select the best one and to initiate the visa process. So that's roughly that's the whole process in all. 3-step process takes some time, but if, for an example, if you start the process this June, by the 15th of March to 15th of April, you'll have admission decisions for all these countries next year. And then you can pick your option and focus on initiating the visa process. And if everything goes well, by the month of August, you'll be ready to move. So I'll explain these steps one by one again. The assessment process is about identifying what to apply. If you go through us, we charge you 25,000 rupees as kind of a commitment fee. And together with that, we need your degree certificate and the transcript. Once you hand over these documents, we can spend about a week, find out what to apply, and we can provide you a list of options. We can apply with kind of a higher probability to secure a scholarship, the course contents, and the exact documents we need from your end to process you further. So that's the assessment process is all about. The second step is the actual application process. So once we provide you the assessment outcome, you can pick your options. If you are an individual applicant, you can pick up to 12 options from Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. And if you're a married applicant, you can pick up to 8 options from Sweden and Finland, and then submit the supporting documents. Usually, the supporting documents are about your bachelor's degree cert, transcript, A-levels and O-levels obtained from the education ministry, your working experience related documents, and all that. But for Finland, there's a country-specific requirement for some universities. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to approach your home university. This is applicable only if you have completed your studies from a Sri Lankan university. If that is the case, you have to approach the university and get certified 2 copies of your degree certificate and transcript, and submit it along with the other documents for us to process your applications. And we usually apply for multiple options. And at the time of submission, you had to pay us 144,000 rupees. I understand it's quite a lot of money, but even if you apply yourself nowadays, I think you come closer to this figure. For example, we used to spend about 5,500 to 6,500 for a courier just last year, and this year it's gone up to about 9,000 to 10,000, and I'm expecting it to be increased to at least like 13 to 14,000 next year. That's how it is. And if you apply for 4 Finnish universities, you're likely to be required to send about at least 2 or 3 couriers, because you need the documents to be sent physically for these countries. especially for Finland. So that's the process is about. Once the application process is completed, between 15th March to 15th April, we can receive the admission decisions for all these countries and then decide on what to pick or what to finalize. The third process is the visa process, and it actually depends from one country to another. I'll start with Norway. Norway has a very straightforward visa process. It's very, short one as well. Takes like only about 2 to 3 weeks on the average side to secure a resident permit. All you have to do is once you are admitted by a university, you will have to deposit an amount they estimate for the first year's worth of living expenses directly to the university's bank account. On average, this is about 2.7 to 2.8 million. And once you deposit these funds into the university's bank account, you will be given a deposit certificate from the university, which you will have to submit along with other documents for your resident permit application. And there's a Norwegian embassy in Colombo, so you don't have to go anywhere. You can get the whole process completed within Sri Lanka itself. And once you arrive in Norway and open up a bank account in your name, they will transfer that money in full back to your own account in Norway. But initially, although they don't charge any tuition fees, you still have to have a budget of about 2.7, 2.8 million at least to fulfill this financial requirement. For countries like Sweden and Finland, it's very, again, straightforward. But at some point of time, you'll have to visit New Delhi. I'll explain, but that is for later on. Initially, you apply online. Both countries offer online visa application processes. You'll have to upload certain documents, explain your reasons why you're going there, pay your visa fees, and then you are ready to be heard. But anyways, for countries like Sweden, there's a possibility for you to get a direct grant. If all the documents are in order, you don't have to face any interview or anything. But they have the right to call you up for an interview anytime. So if that happens, you'll have no other option but to visit the Embassy of Sweden in New Delhi to get your interview done. In case if you get a direct grant, then again, you will have to go to the Embassy of Sweden in New Delhi with the whole family to provide your biometric details. But for Sweden and Finland, it's going to be a 1 day in and out process. So you don't have to spend weeks in New Delhi, just one single day. You go there, get your job done, and then you can move out. But still, you're expected to go there some point of time. For Sweden, the visa process is kind of straightforward. And if I explain you about the visa fees involved, for an adult applicant, you pay about 1,500 Swedish kroners, roughly around 35,000 rupees. And if you have children, it's 750 kroners per child, roughly around 17,500 rupees. That's the amount of visa fees you pay and can be paid using a credit card. When it comes to Finland, it's the same process. You can apply online, but the only difference is your case won't be processed until you visit the Embassy of Finland in New Delhi and identify yourselves. So that is something you have to do. Once you apply online, you have to request an appointment from the embassy in Delhi, visit them, provide your biometrics. There's also a small visa interview. And once it's done, you can come back to Sri Lanka and patiently wait for them to process your case. And in both cases, for Sweden and Finland, once you visit New Delhi and come back, they will send these resident permit cards. They now issue these plastic cards instead of paper visas. So these cards, for Sweden, they will send it to the honorary consul in Colombo, and the Finnish resident permit cards will be sent to VFS in Colombo. So you can collect the cards from them and fly to the respective country. You don't have to visit New Delhi again. But when it comes to Estonia, it's a different process, still the kind of traditional application process they have. So what you have to do is you have to get your applications organized, make an appointment, visit the Embassy of Estonia in New Delhi, submit the documents, and then you'll have to wait till they process the documents. Usually takes like about 7 to 10 days on average. And then once the visa is ready, you can collect your passport from there, come back to Sri Lanka to fly to Cali. So that's the usual process for them. If I explain about the visa fees for Finland, I didn't mention that previously. Usually it's 350 euros for the main applicant, 470 euros for the co-applicant, and 270 for each child. So for the main applicants, it's about 100 to 110,000 rupees. For the co-applicants, it's around 100, about 120 to 130,000, I think, rupees. And for each child, it's around 70,000 rupees. I know it's probably the expensive most visa fees you have for these countries if you compare each and every, but it's a very good option. For Estonia, it's usually 100 euros for the resident permit, roughly around 26 to 27,000 rupees. And that's payable at the time of the embassy visit. So that's about visa fees. Anyways, if you go through us, you can, learn about these fees in details again. And even if you want to apply directly, this information is pretty much widely available online. So that's about the visa process. But apart from these fees and the initial process, there's also a financial requirement, proof of fund requirement for you to be able to secure a visa. If I start from Norway again, for Norway, there's no requirement of being able, being required to submit your bank statement as such, but still there's a requirement of transferring your living expenses for the first year directly to the Norwegian university. That's about it. But for Sweden and Finland, you have to show bank statements, having at least, like, if you are an individual applicant, you need to be having at least, I think, 6 million Sri Lankan rupees to apply for a visa successfully. There's also a requirement to, show proof of funds for the first year, but I don't usually do that. I recommend all my clients to have, show sufficient funds for the entire duration of their stay. So that kind of, leave no room for them to question you about your finances. So the best thing is to show sufficient funds for the entire duration stay, and you need about 6 million to do that if you are an individual applicant. If you are a family of 2, then this amount will be increased to about 8.5 to 9 million. And if you have any children, then this amount can be increased to about 11 to 12 million. But there's one advantage with these countries, that they only look into a current bank balance. So even if you organize these funds at the last minute, I think you can still be granted the visa with kind of very less risks. So it's always better to, focus more on the application part of the process, because the visa processes for these countries is kind of very smooth than most mainstream options. It's all about having sufficient funds initially, but when it comes to the visa process, it's fairly smooth. Even if you organize these fund requirement at the last minute, you can still apply for your visa and expect it to be granted. For Estonia, the financial requirements is about half of what Finland and Sweden needs. It's about 3.5 million rupees. And then again, it also can be a current bank balance. So if you have this minimum requirement met, you can still be granted a visa. So that's about the financial requirements. And usually countries like Norway, they grant you a resident permit yearly. So they grant it for the first year. As long as you keep your attendance, you can renew it for the second year. For Sweden, for a certain number of selected universities, they grant full-length visa. And for Finland, they usually grant full-length visas if you have sufficient funds. Same for Estonia. For Estonian process, it's kind of different, because initially you will be given an entry visa for about 6 months. And during this 6 months time period, they expect you to go visit the police and border guard in Estonia to apply for your resident permit. And once it's processed, you'll get a full-length visa. That's how the visa processes work for these countries. And let's talk about the costs involved in the process. Like I pretty much explained all these things previously, but there's an assessment fee of 25,000 rupees if you apply through us, and also an application fee of 144,000 rupees, which is refundable in case if you are unable to secure you an admission. We usually accept only those who we can process, but there have been some instances where we have received no admissions at all for a very few number of applicants, in which case we are liable to make a full refund of the entire application fee. And the visa fees, I already explained about this. For Norway, there's a fee of 5,500 Norwegian kroners, so roughly around 115,000, I think. And for Sweden, it's 1,500 Swedish kroners for an adult applicant and 750 for a child. And for Finland, it's 350 euros for the main applicant, 470 euros for the secondary applicant, and 270 for each child. And for Estonia, it's 100 euros for a D visa. So those are the figures for visa fees. And there's also amount of money you should be spending on your air tickets. And air tickets nowadays, because of COVID, are very expensive. I think you'll need to allocate about at least good 150,000 rupees for an individual to fly one way to any of these countries. And you also need to keep in mind that when you travel to India, there's also a separate airfare involved. Usually at the moment, I think it's around 80,000 figure, but it can go up or down with time. For the moment, let's say about 80,000 rupees. And also there are other expenses. As I said earlier, if you have a budget of around at least 1.3 to 1.4 million for a family, that will kind of cover all these initial expenses for the first 6 months. And if you're an individual applicant, you will need about 1.1 to 1.2 million. And those are the kind of figures you should keep in mind for your expenses. So let's talk about the pathways of settling down, because I understand we all migrate with the intention of settling down, at least the vast majority of us. So there are two key pathways for you to, apply for your permanent residency later on. First one is to apply for a work permit. As I said earlier, if you complete your master's, you'll be given a post-study time period of 1 year by all these countries. So you can use that 1 year time period to find a job offer and to apply for a work permit. And regardless of what work you find, as long as it's a full-time contract, you have the right to apply for a work permit. And the advantage of these countries is that it can be any one of you. Like if the two of you go together, you and your spouse, the requirement is for one of you to find a job offer. If your spouse, for an example, to find a job offer that fulfills the minimum salary requirement, he or she can also apply for a work permit. It doesn't have to be the main applicant always for these countries. And once you secure a work permit, in 4 years of time, you can apply for your permanent residency. That's the only requirement they have, 4 years on a work permit. And the second pathway is probably the most safest option, at the same time, the most competitive one. And that is to find an admission for a PhD. If you complete your master's and if you can try hard to secure an admission for a PhD, it's basically like guaranteed pathway for your PR, because all PhDs in these countries are considered as equivalent to employment. You get a general work permit. They're exactly the same work permit like that's been issued to those who find a job offer. And you are paid a stipend, a reasonable one, to cover up your living expenses. And you can naturally fulfill that 4 year residency requirement if you can land a PhD. But then again, we have processed over 400 applicants, like main applicants, and out of these 400 plus applicants, I personally know of only about 10 to 15 maximum who have been able to, apply for PhDs after completion of their masters. It's that competitive. So all these countries, be it Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, or even Iceland, all these Nordic countries, they offer absolute pre-education at the doctoral level with a stipend. So, but again, it's going to be a bit of a competitive process for you to get into. But that option is always there. If you can land an admission for a PhD after completion of your master's, you can probably fulfill the 4 years of residential requirement, using the time you spend as a PhD applicant. And Sweden has made a very clear message on this. Whoever completes a doctoral program in PhD, like doctoral program in Sweden, can apply for their permanent residency right away. There's no other requirement. They have made it very clear. For all other countries, there's no bills being passed or anything like that, but you can naturally, you're likely to be able to fulfill that 4-year residential requirement if you complete a PhD there. But in Sweden, it's low. If you complete a PhD, you have the right to apply for permanent residency. So that's about the slides. And I would like to take in any questions you may have. You can either, type it in the chat box, or you can even verbally ask the questions if you'd like to. Thank you. Any questions, anyone? Yeah, if it's the case, I'd like to wrap this up for today.
Hi, Chamakka. Yeah, I have a question. Is
Go
there any possibility doing PT instead of IELTS?
Absolutely. It was not the same case about a couple of years back, but now, yes, PT is generally accepted by all Finnish and all Swedish universities. So yes, all you need is the corresponding score. I think it's around 69 or something. I'm not sure about that because I'm not familiar with the test PTE. But as long as you have the corresponding score, an IELTS score of 6.5, you are good. You can apply.
Okay, thank you.
No worries, thank you. And any other question?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Purnima. Yeah,
So, Mr. Chamalka, I wanted to ask whether, is it always safer for us before coming and talking to you in June? Is it okay for us to first, safer for us to complete IELTS and GMAT both, or what is the more, what do you want us to do? First,
hey, do you mind me asking about your bachelor's? Like, what exactly you have for your bachelor's?
I did a BSc Honours in International Management, NSPM affiliated with Plymouth.
Okay, so do you have any class for this, like a second upper?
Second upper.
Fair enough, yeah. So you can work on your IELTS and GMAT both if you'd like to. And that is kind of, that will create you higher chances to secure a scholarship, at least to increase the percentage of your tuition fee waiver if you work on GMAT. But IELTS is an absolute must. Please work on it. If you can see us around the month of June, we can talk about the options in 2020.
Okay. And one more question. Masters in Norway are usually for 2 years. Sweden 1 year. Finland 2 years. Norway 2 years also, right?
Yeah, all these masters will cost like 2 years time. But in Sweden, there's a few 1-year options. But unless you apply for the options in spring, I don't really recommend going for a 1-year masters in autumn because you don't get a personal number. Because most 1-year masters are considered 10 months in length. So when you don't have a personal number in Sweden, you're in trouble. It's very hard to get your things done, even to like find a job offer, to open up a bank account, or to do most of the things. So it's always better to apply for a 2-year master's programs. And countries like Norway and Finland, they offer all their masters are generally like 2 years in length if it is from a public research university.
Okay.
No worries. Thank you so much. And any other questions?
Excuse me, Mr. Chamakka.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I have completed my bachelor's in 2018 and an educational gap of 3 years. Will it affect for the scholarship process?
No, not at all for these countries. They don't care about gaps at all. As long as you are employed full time, that's it. There's no other requirement.
The problem is I'm doing a job not in an irrelevant field. So what are your opinions on it?
Again, my opinion is it doesn't matter much for these countries because the working experience doesn't play any role here, because all they look for is your academic merits and maybe the research you have completed during your bachelor's, if there's any, and your English proficiency score. That's it. There's no relevancy of working experience for these countries in most cases. The only difference is there's something called Swedish Institute Scholarship, where the assessment is usually based on your working experience. But other than the SI scholarship, for everything else, it's all about academic merits. and they don't. I think they do that intentionally because it will be otherwise unfair for them to assess applicants. Depends on various backgrounds. Like you cannot recruit someone based on their bachelor's merits and then recruit someone based on their working experience, right? Maybe that's the reason. So your working experience doesn't count much. And we have in the past had like hundreds of applicants. For example, if they have completed their bachelor's in science related area, and then they have completed their working experience in the corporate sector. So it's pretty normal. You can still apply.
Okay, thank you so much.
No worries, thanks. Any questions?
Hi, Chamalka. Thank you for the presentation. Very informative. And yes, I just want to know now, due to the current situation in the country, we have seen, in case if you don't get a tuition fee waiver or a scholarship, if you fail to secure one, if that happens, then when you're going to pay fees, like how is there a supportive system? Because due to the current situation in the country, I have seen people getting failed to pay fees and all that.
No, I understand it perfectly, and even to be honest, we're very concerned about it because we have started receiving admissions this year, and we don't really know what will happen. The only hope we have is if you have, because most Sri Lankans, anyways, we have at least a friend or someone we can trust who lives abroad. And the only hope is with the permission of the university, we can get a third party to pay the amount of tuition fee from another country. And it's usually allowed for these countries. We have done it in the past for at least a couple of cases. So that's something, anyway, we're going to try for the first time in large numbers. So I can give you a complete update after the month of June about this. I think the practical most thing to do is to find someone who's willing to pay this amount of tuition fees on behalf of you. And the only risk of doing that is in case if your visa is refused for any reason, the amount of money he paid will be transferred back to his account. So he has to be a trustworthy person. Otherwise, if he doesn't pay you back, then you're in trouble. But other than that, I think we can, we can at least have the hope of paying the tuition fee that way for these countries, and they usually allow it.
Okay, thank you so much.
No worries, thank you. Any other questions?
And one more question. When we are applying, so by June we will process and it will take some few months. So places like Finland will take next year, August 2023 to start. So Sweden also is the same, Estonia also?
It is the same. For Estonia, you said you have completed your degree from Plymouth University, right? Yeah. So it's not an option because it's a very surprising factor. I think most of you, it's better to tell you about it. I didn't tell that in the information session. For Estonia, any of these offshore degrees you have completed in Sri Lanka doesn't count as a valid qualification. So you have to either have completed your studies within Sri Lanka, or if it's a British qualification, you have to have completed it in the United Kingdom. So it's not an option in your case, but we can apply for everything else. And yes, they have the intakes in next year order.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, so what we can do is, I'll quickly move to the next slide. If you have any questions, you can feel free to call Ravi on this number, 762-803-838, or you can even WhatsApp me on this number, 715-647-333. It's just that we currently engage with this year's applicants, and it might take some time for us to finalize this year completely before moving until 2023. But still, we are more than happy to provide information as much as possible. And there's also something I need to inform you. I think the biggest complaint we have from most of our clients, or at least those who are trying to contact, is that we don't usually answer phone calls. And it happens because we answer a large number of phone calls on a daily basis. And if you have spoken to us, you may know that we might spend about in some cases 2 minutes to 20 to 40 to sometimes 1 hour and more than that on the phone providing information, because we don't have, I mean, we share all the information as much as we know, even if you go through us, or even if you apply directly, or even if you apply for something, some other country. So that's the kind of reason why we are unable to answer each and every call on time. But still, if any of you, have any difficulties contacting us, please leave us a message and we'll surely call you back, and we do that all the time. So thank you so much for joining this session. Really appreciate your time spent on Saturday afternoon for this. And if there's any questions, feel free to contact us. And even if you're applying directly, make sure you have your IELTS requirements done. Make sure you have a sufficient amount of finances with you. So it'll give you a safe environment. You don't have to worry much about getting stuck in those countries. So thanks again. And let's end this for today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.